A year had passed since my separation from Emily, and my life had veered down an unexpected path. I had relocated to a modest downtown condominium, far removed from the house that had once been filled with memories of us. The place was small, but it was quiet, peaceful in a way I had longed for during the chaos of our marriage. My days followed a calm routine: work, books, and the occasional social gathering. There were no luxuries to speak of, but the simplicity gave me the tranquility I needed after the emotional storm of our separation. Since the final court proceedings, Emily and I had maintained a strict silence, neither of us reaching out to the other. The wounds were still fresh, and I convinced myself that the distance was necessary. I didn't trust myself to confront her without the flood of anger and resentment returning. But then, one cold November evening, as I settled in for a quiet night alone, there came an unexpected knock at my door. I hadn't been expecting anyone, so I was taken aback when I opened it to find Emily standing there. Her stance was uncertain, her eyes betraying a mixture of determination and apprehension. "James," she began softly, her voice tinged with hesitation. "Emily?" I asked, my voice thick with surprise and confusion. "What are you doing here?" "I know this is unexpected," she replied, nervously wringing her hands, "but I need to talk to you. It's important." 1,000 questions raced through my mind. Was she here to revisit our painful past, to reawaken old wounds, or was there something more? Despite my better judgment, I stepped aside and allowed her into my apartment. She entered cautiously, sitting at the very edge of the sofa, her posture rigid, as if unsure of how to navigate the space between us. I sat opposite her, maintaining a distance, uncertain of what to expect. "It's about my father," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "Your father," I repeated, my frown deepening in confusion. "Richard," she added almost reluctantly. Richard had always been a complication in our relationship. From the beginning, he made it clear that he didn't think I was good enough for his daughter. His constant interference had caused tension between Emily and me, and had contributed to the unraveling of our marriage. "He's very sick," she continued, her voice cracking slightly. "The doctors say he doesn't have much time, and he's been asking to see you." "See me?" I echoed, still incredulous. "Why would he want to see me?" Emily hesitated, taking a deep breath before she spoke again. "He wants to apologize, James. He feels responsible for what happened. Between us." Her words hit me harder than I expected. Richard, the man who had done everything in his power to drive a wedge between us, now wanted to make amends? I didn't know how to respond. Part of me wanted to laugh at the absurdity of it, while another part seethed with anger. But Emily's pleading gaze held me there. "I don't know, Emily," I said after a long pause. "This is complicated." "I know it's a lot to ask," she said quickly, her voice desperate. "But it would mean so much to him, and to me." I studied her, searching for any hidden agenda or ulterior motive. All I saw was sincerity, vulnerability. Despite everything that had happened, despite the hurt and betrayal, a small part of me still cared for her. Seeing her so vulnerable stirred something within me that I had long since buried. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I nodded. "All right," I said quietly. "I'll do it." 2 days later, I found myself standing outside Richard's hospital room, my heart pounding in my chest. Emily stood beside me, her face unreadable. I couldn't tell what was going through her mind, but I could feel her tension in the air. After a brief gesture from her, I reached out and pushed open the door. Inside, Richard sat in a chair, looking frail and diminished. He was a mere shadow of the imposing figure I had once known. His skin had a sickly pallor, his frame thinner than I remembered. But when he saw me, his face lit up with a weak but genuine smile. Despite his evident exhaustion, his eyes sparkled with emotion. "James," he said hoarsely, his voice strained but steady. "Thank you for coming." I nodded, unsure how to respond. The emotions swirling inside me were overwhelming. For years, I had resented this man, blaming him for much of the strain in my marriage. Now, here he was, vulnerable, seeking something I hadn't expected, closure. He took a shallow breath and continued. "I've been doing a lot of thinking about the past," he said, his gaze fixed on mine. "And I realize now the extent to which I disrupted things for you and Emily. I thought I was protecting her, but all I did was hurt both of you." His words struck me like a tidal wave, and an unexpected ache settled in my chest. To hear Richard acknowledge his role in all the pain that had shaped so much of my life was more than I had anticipated. It was a strange kind of comfort, as if the weight of it had finally begun to lift. I swallowed hard, struggling to speak. Finally, I managed to say, "I appreciate you saying that. But it wasn't just you. Emily and I made our own mistakes, too." A small, tired smile tugged at the corners of Richard's mouth, and his eyes softened. "Perhaps so," he murmured. "But I hope you can forgive an old man for his part in it." I felt a mixture of emotions, relief, pity, and something else, something I couldn't quite place. "I forgive you," I said, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. That conversation marked a turning point. After months of bitterness and distance, it opened a path for Emily and me to reconnect, not as a couple, but as allies. We put aside our past, our arguments, and our hurt, focusing instead on how we could be there for Richard in his final days. When Richard passed away a few weeks later, Emily and I stood side by side at his funeral. We were not reunited by love, but by a quiet respect for what had been and for what we had both endured. In the days that followed, we talked, not about the past, but about the memories we shared, the lessons we had learned, and the people we had become. Our chapter had closed, but for the first time in years, I could look at Emily without feeling anger or resentment. There was a sense of peace now, a recognition of the good times we had shared and the growth that had emerged from our struggles. Months later, an unexpected letter arrived in the mail. It was from Richard's lawyer, informing me that he had left me a small inheritance. Along with the money was a handwritten note. "James, thank you for forgiving me. Use this to start something new. You deserve it. Richard." The words were simple, yet profoundly meaningful. Richard's final act of affirmation was something I hadn't realized I needed. Reading the note, I felt a sense of closure, one I hadn't known I was seeking. When Emily knocked on my door that evening, I never expected it would lead to this, not a rekindling of romance, but a path toward healing and mutual understanding. Life, I've come to understand, is full of unexpected twists. And in that moment, I realized that forgiveness is one of the most powerful gifts you can offer, both to others and to yourself.